So this morning you're going to get a little bit of an inside scoop. Please help me in welcoming the Honourable Joey Hew, Minister of Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure, along with his team here, Deputy Chief Officer Tristan Hydes, the Town Manager, Colin Lumsden, Senior Policy Officer Charles Brown, and Policy Officer Marion Pandui.
Hi, good morning. I'm Tristan Hydes. Quickly, I'd like to thank RICS for allowing us the opportunity to participate here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to dwell on too long. I'm going to introduce Colin. I just want to say a little quick, brief history about this program. The last government initiated this, and along with the help of Mr. Kenneth Ebanks, he and I went out and did a lot of research and started talking to stakeholders, and we sort of laid the groundwork for what is now Colin's primary role. I think from the outset we saw that there were some real prerequisites that we had to quickly accomplish or get started on, and again, the government committed for a long-term plan of this, and that's how we started rolling it out. Now I think we're getting into the finer little details of it, and Colin and Charles and Marion will sort of outline where we're going from here. Colin?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you to the chapter of RICS for having us here today. We've taken a fresh look at Georgetown, and with that fresh look, we have an ethos. Go back to the beginning. We have an ethos that we put together, which is not clearly visible on this thing, because there's a mistake somehow with the slides when we sent them over. But the ethos is generally talking about the holistic approach towards revitalizing the city, and it involves gathering information from our public and private stakeholders, and also implementing policies and regulation that we use to further our efforts in the built environment. This presentation would basically cover the study area, the architectural style of the revitalization area, some common problems, some strategies, and other ideas in the revitalization area. Prescriptively, the study area is a very small one, per se, when it compares to Georgetown. It's basically 200 acres. It's bounded north by Fish Shack, close to Borden Road, south by Eden Rock Dive Center, and to the east by Eastern Avenue. What we have here is an historical aerial of Georgetown for the past 47 years, from 1971 to 2013. Significant changes started to happen from 1994. Moving along to 99, there's some changes with the dock area. The urbanity in terms of the building structures kind of remained the same. There was a lot more black space and parking space as time went on, but Georgetown basically had minimal changes from a building infrastructure standpoint from 1999. The characteristic of Georgetown, the population is approximately 1,700 people. 64% of that is non-Caymanians. And you can see the rest in terms of Filipino and Spanish. Majority of unemployed people are Caymanians, unfortunately. Thank you. The employment and education demographics, we have about 70 to 80%, which are semi-professional tradespeople, unskilled laborers. The other 3 or 4% is managerial and full professionals. In terms of demographics, 30%, 26% is around 30 plus years, 40 plus years about 24%, 60 plus years 4%, and so on. The revitalization problems, some of the obvious problems that we've had, just from observation, from gathering information, the parking, housing issue, of course, traffic, transit and transportation problems, walkability and connectivity, and one of the ones that we feel is kind of important is definitely lack of lighting, green space in parks, also the fact that Georgetown is a single-use zoning over the past few years has contributed to some of its decline. Yeah, I'm going to now pass this on to Charles. Charles will further talk about some of the land use issue and the actual makeup of the city itself.
Can you all hear me in the back? Yes. Perfect. Morning. Oh, this one's too loud now. Georgetown, this image over here, let me see if I can get this. Can everybody see this? That's taken from edge of the city. That's essentially how people perceive your city. Nodes, paths, edges, landmarks. And in Georgetown, our edge is this coastal edge. This, Marian is actually going to touch on later about all of the connectivity. But this is the preliminary proposals that we have in terms of interventions, in terms of roads in town. So the coastal edge, this is the draw of town. This is what everybody's going to see. This is what sells town, and this is what we're trying to promote. And along this edge, one of the interventions we'll be looking at is how to get more public interaction along this edge. So both in terms of interacting with the water, and then also in getting people through this edge and into the commercial district that just fronts it. So you're talking about trying to activate these little streets and get people out here and make this more of a destination that people can actually enjoy and stay at. Right now, it feels very transitional. You move through by car. This is just looking at the major routes in. This is actually something that Georgetown has done quite well. This is our main thoroughfare here, Bobby Thompson Way. This is the main traffic route in. And then you have some smaller routes with Harbor Drive. And this is Walker's Road would be down here. And then this is connecting into Edward. And then you have a little bit of dispersion that happens along here. This is the vertical ways in from essentially east, coming up from the bottom, and down from West Bay. And then these are your feeder roads. And you can already see that, this is Shedden Road, and this is Elgin. You can already see that there's pinch points here. Mary Street comes off just around here, but it's hard to get into our city. But we do this well in terms of keeping out the major traffic. It would be a travesty for the major thoroughfare to go through the city. So just a little bit on land use. What you see in terms of yellow is residential, red, commercial. There is already a good amount of mixes and uses in town. But the development plan that came in, as Colin mentioned, is a single-use development. This is all zoned commercial. And in the 70s, coming way up until essentially 2010, you were very, very limited in terms of what you could develop in terms of residential. And residential, be it apartments, townhouses, those denser uses, and of course larger apartment buildings, are the building blocks of any city. So the fact that we've sterilized our city from the 70s does play a role in terms of the redevelopment and the decline of town. And we'll be looking to try and bring these uses back and to make them more flexible. So that would involve moving to more form-based coding, simplifying the planning process, and making it more flexible to build a layered system. Yeah. I think I want to highlight 2 points that I've mentioned previously in terms of issues for redevelopment as well, and that would be parking is a major issue, and it's in two fronts. The current development code requires that you put all parking on your own site or very, very close to it. And if you actually did a study of town, as we've done in a preliminary form, town is over 50% parking. But the problem is that the parking is locked up in private parking, and it's not accessible to various people. So it's very hard to access that parking. So in the future, we'll be looking at parking maximums instead of minimums, and then also looking at ways to activate and get use of other parking that's around. The other is building size. The standard lot right now in the regulations is 20,000 square feet as a minimum lot size. That is a very, very large parcel. For comparison, this all building here, or this little building right here, if you were to just draw a lot around them, they'd be looking at something around 5,000 square feet. If you were to draw a lot around, say, Bar Crudo, Guy Harvey's, you'd be looking at 2,000 square feet. So the building block of town needs to be reduced so that it can allow much more people to get into the development industry and redevelopment to occur. Connectivity. You should be able to park once and move around town. And Colin will touch on the multiple issues that he'll be working on to try and alleviate that. But this is a map that shows you pedestrian connectivity. And you can see a lot of places things nearly touch, but they don't touch. So one of the struggles that we'll be working on going forward is how, through the planning redevelopment process, do we promote pedestrian connectivity? When we redevelop a building, how do we isolate that civic space for the betterment of everybody? And this is just quickly just a diagram that talks about some of the interventions we want to do on Harbor Drive. So I showed you a drawing earlier that had these two legs, Harbor Drive and Edward Street. And the idea is to reduce the reliance on Harbor Drive. So let's just say, for argument's sake, it's a one-way road. And the parallel parking that's primarily on Edward, you would move that over to Harbor. And then that allows protection of the pedestrian, a place to actually dwell, and then more of the vehicular load gets taken by Edward. You also will notice a connection here with Godfrey Nixon. So this is Ale Thompson right here. Godfrey Nixon right now comes to here. This has actually already been gazetted. So that's work that we are already engaging on and starting to build this connector in. This is a connector between Shedden and Elgin, and this is Eastern Avenue right here. So these road options give you more opportunity to come into the town center, move around, and get around effectively. In terms of heights, very quickly, and just a very diagrammatic stage, I mentioned earlier that the sea is the main draw. So that the attraction is to try and have low developments on the coast, slightly higher in this region, and slightly higher in this region, so that everybody can enjoy and see the sea. And now I'll pass on to Marion.
Okay, I got two, Alfred. There you go. So, what are these streets going to look like in town? How are we going to protect the users that are going to use our roads? Back in November time, as part of the National Roads Authority Road Safety Conference, we presented a concept called Complete Streets. Complete Streets is a concept where all users are able to use the road safely. You have an active sidewalk, you have bike lanes, you have an active roadway, because you cannot forget about the motorists. They still need to get from A to B. You have crosswalks, planting strips, and green spaces. So we've actually, as part of the National Roads Authority's concept, we are presenting this on West Bay Road, which I presented in November. Continuity within this concept, we can bring this down into Georgetown. The speeds are supposed to be slow, so we're going to bring all the road users back into town by providing these concepts as part of the Complete Streets. You can't do both at the same time. So, as we all know, as the minister mentioned earlier, a new road that's going to come to fruition, get built a little bit later this year, is the, I'm going to get the name right, the Godfrey Nixon Extension, where we're going to first present the Complete Streets concept. So it's not going to be just for motorists. We're going to provide space for the pedestrian. for the bicyclist, and to provide active maybe bus laybys for our buses, promote the public transit along these routes. So it's going to slow the traffic down to the 25 miles per hour that it should be. So you can get an idea, the one in the top corner there could be an idea of what Godfrey Nixon Way could look like. So, complete streets are for everyone. They are designed to operate to enable safe access for all road users. So just to give you an idea, this is West Bay Road, the existing profile of West Bay Road. Nobody really likes it. Nobody wants to walk down that. It's not appealing to your pedestrian. You don't want to ride your bike down that particular stretch of road. It doesn't feel safe. Fortunately, we're not just providing space for the recreational users. We have to provide space for those captive users. So your bicyclists, your construction workers who ride their bike to and fro. They use West Bay Road. The one next to it is a proposed profile of West Bay Road. So we provided, you have the sidewalks, and the lanes can become a little bit more narrow, so you give a perception of slowing down. West Bay Road is already designated as 25 miles per hour. Now we need to physically slow them down. So we can narrow those lanes down, provide a boulevard down the center. We have strategically placed crosswalks along that stretch. You can put, I know everybody doesn't really like them, but neighborhood circles or roundabouts will also be provided. And we're going to put this concept into Georgetown where those users should be. And we want to just provide a safe place for those users to get around town by providing those sidewalks, the bike lanes, and the protected crossings. Now I'm back to Colin.
Just want to talk a little bit about the architectural style. Typically, Georgetown architectural style historically centers around our town hall and the city itself, other buildings such as the LA building, the courthouse building, and other buildings from that period. Just from what Charles mentioned about a block and having more regularized block that fits into the context and scale of the city, we're looking at situations such as zero lot lines, parking maximum as usual, and also to create quite possibly good infill projects. What you're looking at here is called the transect, which we basically looked at Georgetown in terms of its makeup, from the center, urban center, right back to rural areas, the urban core areas. This is part of our analytics in terms of understanding what the city is contextually. And from that, we're going to create situations where we could capitalize on the concept of new urbanism with mixed use, vegetation, tree planting, seeding, and all these other things. Based on some of the problems that we mentioned before, some of the strategies moving forward definitely is to understand the community. This means engagement process in terms of town hall meetings. Some of that has already started, to be honest, and also research and consultation. Other strategies, attractive walkable places, clean walkable places. And also the president of Emirates, Mr. Hughes, talked about the economy and diversification. That's also part of our process at the ministry because we're also commerce. Promoting the employment activities in different sectors also is a part of revitalization itself. Moving on, creating equitable housing, building options. Housing options is not only the type in terms of options, but it's also economic levels. It's also having options where people could live in different parts of the city. And also another part of this process is also improving regulations, make it more streamlined, make things more easier for developers. Other strategies also incorporating smart city initiatives, lighting, communication, Wi-Fi, partnering with other agencies within government and outside of government. And generally just having a sustainable and management approach towards the city, being very proactive. As the minister mentioned, in terms of our policies, we want to be, in terms of a planning process, we want to be more proactive and come up with solutions before they're probably too late. What we have here is basically a high-level schedule of some of the type of work that we're doing. We're still trying to categorize some of the efforts that we're doing. But as you could see, the process started in 2015, which was basically research and planning, gathering information, consulting with various agencies and such. There's also a major code reform with the planning department, with Plan Cayman, that we're currently involved with the planning department. There's public consultation from the general public that we're looking to start in a few weeks. There's also capital infrastructure investment. Those have already started with the road infrastructure, Godfrey-Nixon, and other major connectors. There's also small minor works upgrades that we're doing throughout Georgetown itself. These are the small wins, low-hanging fruits. And also another set of works that we're doing is programs. There's a celebration program throughout the city with event planning and other things, and other programs such as tree planting programs, and also even competition programs for different furniture throughout the city, seating and other things. Some next steps also that we're thinking of. We're working on these things right now as we speak. Lighting improvements. One of the biggest problems that I saw when I started to focus on Georgetown was the lack of lighting. We can't have a city if we can't see it. We're probably one of the few jurisdictions that doesn't have a distinction between a utility pole and a lamp pole, because our utility poles are our lamp poles. And this is one of the things that we want to change right away. Lighting should be very scale-wise. It should be task-oriented. It should have certain ambience to it. So we're working on those things right away. Tree planting. Of course, I mentioned the city furniture in terms of having proper seating, proper options in terms of using the city. The Godfrey-Nixon extension is scheduled to start sometime this year. We've wrapped up a few preliminary works on that already. The Smart City Initiative, we're working on those things, and code incentives. And another big thing that we're also thinking of is, Mike is chipping in and out, is the transportation issue with Georgetown. We're looking at doing a local transportation. Most likely, we're looking for something electric, something portable, accessible, and easy to use. We feel with the parking situation, having people have proper options, connectivity, and be able to move around the city is very important. So this is something we want to do in the very near future, probably 1 or 2 routes with 1 or 2 loops throughout the city itself. Just some quick town ideas. Back to the Smart City Initiative, we're looking at possibly doing displays with maps and other things that would give access to visitors and other people that are visiting the city. You could see landmarks, you could see where bus routes are, you could see where to go in terms of restaurants and other things. Recyclable programs that are neatly incorporated in the city design and architecture. Even seating that are self-sustainable, digital seating, and also having more pedestrian-oriented streets. And of course, the street lighting, which we feel is very important, is also on the table for discussion. In the top right, you can see a picture of a downtown area that's very passive, very relaxing, and of course, it's at night. So we want to bring people in to Georgetown at all hours of the day with different activity options and different things to do, I should say. Just quickly, in terms of resources and what we're doing, we're using the resources of BIM in terms of research and other things, and looking at the science and the data within Georgetown itself, the layering of information, and just managing the information that we receive. It's not only pictorial, it's very science-based and data. Just to have an idea of what it is that some of the outcomes are. These are just some of the ideas we were playing with in terms of pedestrianization and looking at different building heights throughout the city and see how it compares with the existing infrastructure. Just a little bit, another set of pictures showing the post office and adding trees and some pedestrian markings to the actual road itself. And that's basically it. I want to thank you guys. I'm just going to pass it over to Tristan just to wrap up and say a few things towards what we're doing in the next few months and years. Thanks.
Thanks, Colin. So I think it's important to note that, you know, this city comes together over the long term, and I don't think this is not a quick fix. The minister has pushed us hard to find those quick wins, and Colin mentioned them briefly, and we are working towards those. We've already met with CUC, for instance, and we've started the routes on where to put these lamp poles. We've laid out some plans for where to pedestrianize, how to landscape it. So in the coming months, those things are going to move forward. Godfrey Nixon will come because obviously we need traffic to, or people to come into the town properly. It was one of the, I think, key features why the city started to decay in the first place. But as we move forward, I think it's going to ramp up into bigger and better things. We've also met with quite a number of developers, many of whom I see in this room today, many whom I've asked again, are you really doing it? And they're like committing to it. Not gonna call anybody by name, but I'm looking at him. So, and I think they are. You know, we definitely have the debate of height for Georgetown. Right now it's 5-story with a 7-story overlay, and we've committed to raising that. I think, again, going back to Minister's speech, the Premier sort of dropped the nugget there on maybe something iconic, and where that happens, Georgetown is a great place for it. But as of now, we've seen a few developers come in with some proposals that are looking for higher, more stories, and I think we're there to give it to them. I think we're going to have to amend the planning law, and that's probably in the next sitting. So we are moving towards it, and I'd ask that any feedback you want to provide, you feel free to. There's our website. We're on the ministry level. We're actually forming a steering committee that's going to function along with Colin to guide this development. That's going to happen in probably the next month or so, and that's made up of stakeholders and key players of the industry. So we're doing these things, and I really am excited about it, and I hope that everybody will sort of participate and want to get into seeing Georgetown be revitalized.
All right, thank you all so much. We do, I'm told, have a couple of extra minutes for questions, if you're willing to take some questions from the audience. Does anybody have any questions for this group? Yes.
I'm not sure who this should be directed to, but Minister, perhaps it's for you. Yeah, the question is, how much is this going to cost, and is the money there? Because, I mean, it's a wonderful looking plan, and funding is always, at least from my experience, the key issue. So, you know, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot here, but that's my question.
Be happy to answer that. This government, and in fact the previous administration, has been committed to this exercise. We've spent the last several years putting in the roadwork infrastructure. We continue with that in this current budget. One of my, you know, when I took over the ministry, I made the decision that before we went any further, we would need to bring in the town manager and have the person dedicated full-time to to the purpose. And now that Colin is here, we will start to move those funds that we were using for the infrastructure, the road networking around the town into funding the actual revitalization of the city center. So in the past, we've spent, there's been 5 to 7 million, I would say, in the last several budgets on the road works under the Georgetown Revitalization Initiative. And we will probably see, not in the very early stages, certainly probably not in the next budget, but as time goes on, we'll see those numbers continue to maintain the anywhere from $3 to $5 million going into the actual efforts within the city center. Annually.
Yes. And if I may add to it, I think also we've been working with other agencies, so it's not just our ministry that has all the budget. We've talked to, for instance, Water Authority about sewage throughout Georgetown and how to cost that. We've again talked with CUC about going underground with utilities and how to share those costs. So we do realize it's a pretty expensive undertaking, but I think together with private venture, with various government agencies, I think it can work.
Any other questions?
Hi, I just noticed in the planning there, there's an absence of the cruise ship mentioned. There's nothing in the planning, no one's talking about it. Can you just...
Sure. I guess I'll take that one too, right? I think early on we made the decision that Georgetown revitalization had to happen with or without the cruise pier. However, we do recognize that the cruise pier is there, oh, I thought I was speaking, that the cruise pier is an important feature of Georgetown, and the government obviously shows its commitment to it, and that's sort of almost like an added bonus. But we realize that that's not the only industry that we have to rely on for Georgetown to be sustainable. The point of being sustainable is to look at other industries. A very good example of this is government's commitment to the law industry by purchasing the Scotiabank and committing to that redevelopment for that. And then, of course, we're also looking at ways to bring residential to it and with residential comes other industries, if you want to look at it that way, retail especially, that can feed off of each other.
I'd just like to add to that also that traffic is a very important thing, and we are also endeavored to look at the city in terms of our decision, the impacts of some of these traffic decisions. So we purchased a traffic model program, which we're going to be using to do all the numbers in terms of closing off this street, what would happen. And also on a busy cruise day, what would happen to our streets in terms of passengers and pickup trucks, and in terms of what types of modes of vehicles that would be used throughout the city. So those things we're looking at also. But as Tristan say, we have to somehow look intrinsically. This is a resurrection that's from the inside out. So we want the city itself, the heart of the city, to be back. It's dependent on other things. The port is a large consideration of it, but it's also a separate idea also in what we want. And this comes from the minister himself. He's passionate about it. So we're working in that capacity.
Any final questions? Maybe just one last question if there are any.
So with the increased density, depending upon how great that density is, that's a lot of added value. I've seen personally a lot of elderly that are hurting, et cetera, et cetera. If, for instance, somebody's going to get to go to 30 stories high or something like that, and I'm just putting a number because I have no idea, this is an excellent opportunity to make the developer set aside 10% or something like that to provide for some of our needy in our population, and they're still making, good money. So more of a comment, but have you considered that?
I think that I think that's a great observation. And there are cities, for instance, London does something quite similar, right? There's an established plane, and if you come with a proposal that is really, really good, and that could be in terms of your reinvestment, or that could be in terms of the impact that it thinks, that the government feels is going to bring to the city, there are grants given to such a project. I think it is very necessary that we build stronger capacity in our infrastructure fund. Right now, most of our infrastructure fund goes to roads. But we've talked about all the proposals that we want, and you're dead right. And I think it's also pertinent to note, based on the last question and this one, that it's great to have big projects, but big projects are going to jumpstart the city. They're going to inject a lot of momentum in the city, but there has to be lots of room for small projects and a layered approach. Even if you go to 7 stories, 10 stories, 30 stories, whatever it is, it's a layered approach. Right now, the height in this area is 7 stories, but most of the buildings are 1 stories, 2 stories, 3 stories. So there has to be that capacity, and we have to focus a lot of effort on making it possible for the smaller developers to build these infill projects that accommodate the same market you're talking about as well, and possibly some of it being assisted housing, some of it being all the various elements of society that need to be focused on.
All right, thank you so much to Minister Hugh and his team here. Thank you for joining us this morning.